Hello, everyone, and welcome back to LexiMind, the channel where knowledge meets language learning.
That's right. If you're new here, this is the place where we dig deep into amazing books, discuss the big ideas inside them, and at the same time, we teach you real, useful language that you can actually use in your everyday life.
I'm Mary.
And I'm Lucas, and today we have an absolute page-turner for you.
Let's jump right into this explainer. Today, we're unpacking the sheer drama, the brilliant but totally reckless characters, and the lasting financial vocabulary born from the 1929 Wall Street crash. We're going to look back at an era of just unbridled ambition, followed by a truly catastrophic collapse, and the profound reforms that came out of the rubble. It's absolutely crucial for understanding exactly how our modern financial world was shaped. So let's get into it.
We're starting right in the thick of it. Picture this. It's Black Monday, October 1929. Charles Mitchell, the relentlessly optimistic head of National City Bank, a guy people literally called a financial human dynamo, makes a terrifying discovery. He finds out his own traders had secretly bought 71,000 shares of his bank's stock. The price tag on that? $32 million. And the real problem? It was money they simply did not have. It is just a staggering moment of pure panic.
Now, to really grasp how a titan like Mitchell got pushed to the absolute edge, we have to rewind a bit. We have to look at the collective delusion gripping the entire nation earlier that year. The United States was basically building a massive monument to the future, but they were doing it entirely on borrowed time. If you've ever watched a modern meme stock rally or a crypto frenzy and felt that intense fear of missing out, you know exactly what this psychological fever feels like.
I mean, nothing captures the era's wild optimism quite like this pitch from wealthy financier John Raskoff. He wrote an article for the Ladies' Home Journal titled "Everybody Ought to Be Rich." His pitch was incredibly seductive. He told the masses, look, if you just invest a small amount in the stock market every month, you are going to become wealthy. This whole idea of democratizing the market, it pulled everyday wage earners straight into a massive, highly fragile bubble.
And that brings us to the dark wizardry behind this whole delusion: credit. When you boil it down, this was essentially just borrowed money being used to fuel investments. But powerful figures of the time, guys like J.P. Morgan's Thomas Lamont, genuinely believed that this wizardry of credit could solve almost any global or political problem. The belief that you could just fix anything with borrowed money basically became the underlying religion of the entire era.
So, you might be wondering, were the authorities just asleep at the wheel? Well, the Federal Reserve could absolutely see the gambling getting out of hand. But instead of setting hard rules, they tried what they called moral suasion. Basically, gently asking the banks to please behave. And insiders like Charles Mitchell openly defied them. Mitchell was out there selling stocks to ordinary people like everyday commodities, literally treating them like neckties. He even publicly pledged $25 million of his bank's money to prop up the failing market, which was a direct challenge to the Fed.
The tragic irony of all this is pretty devastating. Back in September 1929, an economist named Roger Babson actually predicted an imminent collapse, an event that later became known as the Babson Break. And what happened to him? He was publicly mocked by other experts. The crowd simply did not want to hear it. Yet privately, behind closed doors, insiders at the very top, like Thomas Lamont, were quietly telling their families to sell off millions in stock and hoard cash. Watching this build-up, you can see exactly where the tension finally snaps in late October. First, you have Black Thursday on October 24th, which brings massive, uncontrollable selling. Then, after a brief, tense pause over the weekend, the true devastation hits with Black Monday on the 28th, followed immediately by Black Tuesday on the 29th. It was a multi-day freefall that completely shattered the American economy.
They didn't just sit there and watch it burn, though. During the panic on Black Thursday, the most powerful bankers formed a massive $250 million stabilization pool. Richard Whitney, the acting head of the New York Stock Exchange, actually marched right onto the floor and made this dramatic, highly theatrical bid for U.S. Steel. It was pure theater, designed just to restore confidence. And you know what? It worked. But only for a few days. Reality quickly overpowered the theatrics.
By the end of 1929, the numbers were almost incomprehensible. Approximately $50 billion in stock value had simply vanished into thin air. To put that into perspective, it's just an unfathomable amount of wealth gone. But the human cost was so much worse. Countless ordinary people were completely ruined, and powerful figures weren't spared either. We saw incredibly tragic outcomes, including suicides among ruined bankers like James Riordan. But here's the crazy part. Not everyone lost everything. In stark contrast to the millions of ordinary Americans whose life savings were wiped out, legendary speculator Jesse Livermore actually made a staggering $100 million profit during the collapse. No way, right? How? Because he had bet against the market. He knew the crash was coming and totally capitalized on the disaster.
So as the Great Depression set in and it became agonizingly clear that a quick recovery was just a fantasy, the public was furious. I mean, they needed someone to blame. This intense demand for answers and, let's be honest, scapegoats, led directly to the explosive Pecora hearings in 1933. These were launched under newly elected President Franklin D. Roosevelt to investigate exactly what Wall Street had been hiding all those years.
And oh boy, what the hearings revealed completely enraged an already starving public. Charles Mitchell was forced to sit there and admit to a wash sale, which was basically selling stock to his own wife purely on paper just to avoid paying income taxes. The sheer public fallout forced his resignation. But even worse, the hearings exposed that all 20 partners of the ultra-powerful House of Morgan paid exactly zero income tax in 1931 and 1932. Zero. But out of this intense public fury came some real, highly consequential reform. FDR immediately declared a national bank holiday just to stop the bleeding. But the most lasting change was the Glass-Steagall Act of 1933. This was a vital law that officially separated commercial banking from investment banking. Basically, it ensured that the neighborhood bank holding your everyday savings could no longer take your money and gamble it away on Wall Street.
And this chapter of history concludes with a truly surreal twist of fate. Charles Mitchell, the reckless dynamo who arguably fueled the entire delusion, goes on trial for tax evasion, but is actually found not guilty by a jury, literally weeping with joy in the courtroom. Meanwhile, Richard Whitney, the guy who made that heroic theatrical bid on Black Thursday, he's later exposed for stealing millions and is sent to Sing Sing prison for grand larceny. You really can't make this stuff up.
All right, moving into Section 2, the language of finance. Let's break down some of the specific vocabulary we can extract from these dramatic events. First up is speculation. This word perfectly describes the dangerous, reckless gambling that ordinary people were pulled into during the 1920s. To speculate is to buy something hoping the price will rise so you can sell it for a quick profit, but it carries massive risk. It is the exact opposite of safe, careful saving. It's essentially rolling the dice.
Next, take a look at the phrasal verb to prop up. This means to physically or financially support something that is weak and about to collapse. It's exactly what Charles Mitchell tried to do when he pledged millions of his bank's dollars to prop up the failing stock market. You're literally shoving a support under something to delay the inevitable fall.
Which naturally leads us to a bubble. This term is absolutely essential for describing any market that becomes dangerously and unrealistically overpriced. Think about Wall Street in 1929 or the housing market in 2008. A bubble occurs when the price of an asset inflates far, far beyond its actual worth, expanding and expanding until, just like a real balloon, it inevitably pops. Now, consider this classic idiom, to kill the goose that lays the golden eggs. In finance, this means destroying the very engine that's making you successful, usually through sheer greed and short-sightedness. Speculators drove prices up so relentlessly that they destroyed the underlying economy, effectively killing their golden goose.
And how are they buying all these stocks to inflate the bubble in the first place? On margin. This just means investing with borrowed funds. It is an incredibly risky move because if prices fall, you don't just lose your original investment, you still owe the massive debt to the lender. Astonishingly, even Winston Churchill was over in New York playing the market on margin right before the crash hit.
Meanwhile, Jesse Livermore utilized a totally different strategy, short selling, or just shorting. This is a clever, but again, highly risky maneuver where an investor actually makes a massive profit when an asset's price falls. You are literally betting against the market. And that is exactly how Livermore walked away with $100 million while everyone else lost everything.
When the dust finally settled, the ruined public desperately needed a scapegoat. A scapegoat is a person unfairly blamed for a much larger, systemic problem so that others can avoid taking responsibility. We see this today all the time, right? But in 1929, Wall Street bankers, particularly guys like Mitchell, were singled out as the ultimate scapegoats to carry the blame for the entire global financial failure.
Rounding out our vocabulary, we see bankers who chose to defy the Federal Reserve, meaning they openly and boldly resisted authority. We have consequential laws like Glass-Steagall, meeting actions with major, lasting impacts. And finally, we have power players like Thomas Lamont, who was described perfectly as the iron fist in the velvet glove, someone soft and polite on the surface, but absolutely ruthless underneath.
So, I want to leave you with this somewhat provocative thought. As we look back at the extreme ambitions, the collective delusions, and the devastating crashes of 1929, we have to ask ourselves, are these financial cycles truly just history? Or, when we look around at our own modern booms and bubbles, is 1929 simply a reflection of our present? Think about that for a bit, and keep exploring the language and the history that continues to shape our world today.